مورخین و شاهدان عینی که هنوز هستن عده‌ای از اونها هستن، کسان زیادی که تحولات 70-80 ساله گذشته رو از نزدیک دیدن و هنوز صاحب عقل هستن، هنوز حی‌اند، حاضرن، اون زمان قدرت تشخیص داشتن، هنوز هم قدرت تشخیص دارن. اینها شهود هستن که وقوع گروه‌های آدمسوزی در موقعیتی به نام آشویتز این رو رد میکنن و علت شاید من به نظرم میرسه که اگر کسانی تحول یا واقعه یا پدیده سوزاندن یهودیان حاضر در سرزمین ژرمن در بحران جنگ دوم جهانی رو به هولوکاست تشبیه میکنن، شاید یک دلیل تبلیغاتی روانی داره.
اصولا در اون مقطع 6 میلیون یهودی وجود داشته که حالا بپذیریم همین مدت پورای روسی در بین رفتن.
حالا این رقم مبالغه آمیزی است، بسیار مبالغه آمیزه و کل یهودی‌ها در دنیا اگر بشی رقمی در حدود 12 میلیون بعد از 57 سال الان رقم در سطح 12 میلیون رسیده که قطعاً در اون زمان تعداد یهودی‌ها به دلیل پراکندگی حداقل در اروپا نمی‌توانستند 6 میلیون باشند، ولی به هر حال خود لابی صهیونیستی و آژانس یهودی این مسئله رو یه مقداری به عنوان شماعی برای دیدن غربی‌ها و برای باج‌خواهی از غربی.
Next one comes from it's not a denial of the Holocaust, but actually a justification of the Holocaust. We heard it already in the first sermon of the preacher. Yes, some Jews were destroyed during World War II, but they deserved it. So here, justification and the hope that next time all of them will be finished by the hand of Muslims. So let's start with Karadawi.
أن الله سلط عليهم طوال التاريخ ما تقدمهم نتيجة إفسادهم. آخر تأديب كان تأديب هتلر، ما فعل به وإن كان مبالغه في الأمر ما بلغه، ولكن استطاع أن يعني يوقفهم عند حدودهم، وكان هذا أدبا إلهيا، تأديبا إلهيا، عقابا قدريا لهؤلاء. والمرة القادمة إن شاء الله ستكون على أيدي المؤمنين.
Here you'll actually see actual pictures of Jews, victims of the Holocaust, but this is described with great joy and keeps calling attention. See how humiliated they are. See what humiliation, and assures the viewers that this is in line, in accordance with what the early Islamic teachers prophesied. So, and next time, of course, it will be at the end of the history.
وتعالوا نشوف المحارق اللي حصلت لليهود انتقام لله عز وجل منهم. تعالوا نشوف ايه اللي عملوا فيهم الشعب الألماني او الجيش الألماني. دي طبعا جزء من افساد اليهود لألمانيا. الألمان اكتشفوا خيانات اليهود وحربهم ضدهم وإفسادهم في بلادهم. تعالوا بقى نشوف ازاي الظلمة يقتلوا بمن يظلمهم. دي المقابر الألمانية، لكن تعالوا نشوف الألمان هيعملوا ايه في اليمن. دي أجسام بني آدمين ميتة وعظام يهود مدمرة، وده فرن كان اليهود بيتشووا جواه، وادي يهودي بيحضروهم للحرق. شوفوا ادي يهود بيموتوا من الجوع او بيموتوا من الغاز. شوفوا بيجمعوهم في عربيات. شوفوا الذل على وجهه ازاي، سبحان الله العظيم. ضربت عليهم الذلة والمسكنة وباءوا بغضب من الله. شوفوا الجوع اللي سلطوه عليهم، شوفوا الذل. وادي دول بيدفنوا احياء. هذا انسان اهو يوضع في حفرة عشان يدفن حيا. وادي أجسام متراكمة على بعضها جزاء وفاقة. وصدق ابن مسعود لما قال شوفوا ادي سلك بتسحق بيه اجسامهم، شوفوا ده بيتربط هو وخمسه معاه بجنازير هيشنقوا بجنزير واحد. ركزوا يا اخواني، شوفوا ادي بيزنقوا الجنزير، شوفوا ادي رؤوس خمس رؤوس مع بعضهم، وادي اجسام، وده بيسقط ظهره بمسمار، وده طفل بيستنى. عايزكم بس تشوفوا الذل اللي عليهم، أجسام عمالة سبحان الله العظيم. هم ظلم وبيهجروا. صدق ابن مسعود حين قال ما من ظالم إلا ويبتلى بمن يظلمه. آدي أجسام وآدي قتل وآدي جماجم وآدي أجسام اليهود بتشحن أقل مما تشحن البهائم والحيوانات. شوفوا الجرافة بتاخد أجساد اليهود وادي المشردين المنتظرين القتل. شوفوا الجندي الألماني هيجي دلوقتي، شوفوا امرأة يهودية هتقبل ايده، شوفوا الذل من الخوف والرعب اللي أصابها بالقتل. شوفوا قد ايه ادي اليهودية تقبل، شوفوا الذل. هو ده اللي احنا منتظرينه انه يحصل، لكن ان شاء الله على ايد المسلمين بإذن الله.
I'm glad to end this presentation. Oh, sorry, there is before we could end. There's also this sheikh, this Egyptian cleric, who also speaks about the inhumanity of Jews.
هؤلاء يعانوا من حالة نفسية مضطربة لأنهم هم سارقون، هم معتدون، والسارق والمعتدي الذي أخذ مالا بغير حق أو أرضا بغير حق يظل في اضطراب نفسي واضطراب وجداني أنه أخذ شيئا واعتدى عليه. هم يريدوا أن يثبتوا للعالم، أن يثبتوا للواقع الدولي والإقليمي أنهم أصحاب حق. هم جرثومة غريبة، جرثومة وميكروب لا مثيل له في الوجود. والله مش أنا الذي أقول، القرآن الكريم وصدره لأنهم لا يوجد لهم مثيل. لتجدن أشد الناس عداوة للذين آمنوا اليهود. يهلك هيك كلمة ناس لا عندهم لا دين ولا مبدأ ولا ضمير ولا. أنا أستنكر ممن يؤمن بالتطبيع معهم، ممن يؤمن بالجلوس معهم، ممن يؤمن أن هؤلاء بشر ليسوا بشر وليسوا أناس وليسوا لا بذوات دين ولا ضمير ولا.
Finally, I'm happy to end with people who speak against anti-Semitism. The first is Osama al-Baz, the advisor to two Egyptian presidents. He is currently the political advisor for international affairs of Hosni Mubarak. Before that, he was advisor to the late President Sadat. And here he speaks against accepting the protocols as a true document, against that and against denying the Holocaust.
لكن هم عندهم الخوف من الإبادة، الخوف من كذا، ولازم نخلينا في الذهن والنفسية الإسرائيلية الخوف مما حدث لهم من مجازر معينة، ومن المجازر اللي حصلت في الحرب العالمية الثانية على يد هتلر والنازية. وانا ضد الناس اللي يقعدوا يقولوا ده ما حصلش وده كذب وبتاع والكلام ده، لان ده ولا حصل. ثانيا هم يقعدوا يقولوا احنا مالنا واحنا اللي عملنا الحاجات دي، ولا حتى الالمان اللي عايشين النهارده اللي عملوها، اللي عملها حزب معين طلع بنظريه خرقاء، نظريه بتبين ان في الاجناس بينهم الجنس الآري يتفوق والجنس كذا السامي يعمل، والجنس السامي ده كانوا بالنسبه للاوروبيين هم اليهود لان هم اللي عايشين فيه. فكون ان هتلر يعمل في اليهود اللي عمله في معسكرات اوشفيتس ومعسكرات باب يار والبتاع والحاجات دي كلها، دي اعتقد كانت دايما ضد الانسانيه مش بس اليهود بس. دي حاجه ندينها ما ناخدهاش على ناحيه باذن على الاطلاق، ناخدها من ادانتها وعدم التشريف فيها حصلت ولا ما حصلتش، وما كم مليون واحد، ناس يقولوا ده من 6 مليون، افرض نسيت انهم من 6 مليون انهم 600,000. نفس الفكر، انت تقبل الناس يدمروا لسبب ما لم يفعلوا شيئا، سواء لم تدينوا ديانه معينه، ده انت ما فيش في هذا لا دين ولا منطق ولا
The next one, don't start yet. This is on a TV channel in Egypt, which is a new one. It was only started earlier this year. And this is a channel which was established to support Mubarak and his party, and to counter the Islamist propaganda. So, and they call themselves the Liberal Channel. It's named Fighel. In this channel, they have a special program on Israel, on Jews, about what is published in the Israeli press. And here, the moderator of this program took for her subject the Holocaust and the Holocaust denial. And she brought an expert, an academic expert, actually a nice guy, Dr. Said Okasha. She introduces her question this way. I repeat the question because it's a lengthy clip and we won't have time to see all of it, so I have to summarize. She introduces the question this way. This is a controversial issue, the issue of the Holocaust. Some claim that the number of people killed was only 30,000. The Jews claim that the number is as high as 3 million. There are those who claim 300,000. So, Dr. Okasha, what do you say? Dr. Okasha starts by saying that actually the number is 6 million. And she goes berserk. She thinks that he is crazy. She said, where from did you invent this number? 6 million. The Jews even don't say that. They claim it's 3 million. How come you say 6? All right, so this is something to be watched. On the so-called liberal channel in Cairo. Yeah, trying to go to.
كم عدد اليهود الذين تم
تقتل حد بناء على اللون ده.
طيب او يا جماعه انه احنا ناس تعرضنا لمحرقه كبيره فاحنا حابين انه
كان ضامن الغلط. تقولوا كلامكم ولا اقول كلامي؟ انا مش فاهم. انا مش هخش معاه في جدل المحرقه حصلت ولا ما حصلتش، 6 مليون ولا 30,000، دي مش قضيه، دي قضيه خسرانه اساسا. والاخطر منها انها لا تستند الى معلومات، يعني كل اللي جه في التقرير لا يستند مين الارشيف اللي قال له، مين الوثيقه اللي قالت له كده؟ يعني ايه الوثائق اللي تحت ايد اللي كتب التقرير بتقول له دول 30,000؟
وايه الوثيقه اللي تحت ايد؟
انا اقول لك بقى، الارشيف السوفيتي نفسه والارشيف الالماني نفسه والارشيف الانجليزي موجودين، الباحثين والمؤرخين بيستخدموا وثائق، ما بيجوش يقولوا ارقام كده على عوامه، بيجيبوا ارقام. انا ما كنتش عارف قوي، يعني في ناس بقى
متاكد استاذ سعيد؟
انا هقول لحضرتك
متاكد، بس احنا كمان عندنا وثائق
في باحث
قلنا من خلال هذه الارقام.
ركز قوي على فكره المؤامره اليهوديه واستخدم حاجات اصبحت محسومه، يعني كلام عن بروتوكولات حكماء صهيونيين. هذه وثيقه مزوره.
سببها احنا المنظمات اليهوديه يعني
دي وثيقه مزوره، دي مزوره بجد.
علينا قبل يعني الله يخليك، بس خلينا اتركنا من موضوع بروتوكولات حكماء صهيون، ابوس اذا خلينا بعيد عن هذا الموضوع.
It goes on and on like this, with the poor Dr. Okasha trying to speak rationally as a scholar, and she just becomes more and more angry at him, and I'm sure this was the first and last time that he's on this channel. Well, thank you.
Panel on radical Islam and genocidal antisemitism. I'll be introducing the speakers all at once at the start, and then we'll just go through them in the order of their presentations, and perhaps there will be time for questions or discussion at the end. Professor Milson, you have already been introduced to. He will be speaking on Arab and Islamic antisemitism today. Rifat Bali is an independent scholar and research associate with Alberto Benveniste Center for Sephardic Studies and Culture in Paris. He lives in Istanbul. and is the author of several books and articles on the history of Turkish Jews in the Turkish Republic, and also works on conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism in contemporary Turkey. He will be speaking on that, conspiracy theories, anti-Semitism, and Jews in Turkey today. Colonel Jonathan Fighel served in various operational and field posts of intelligence gathering for the Israel Defense Force, Intelligence Corps, and he held several command positions in the West Bank, including governor of Ramallah, Jenin, and Tulkarm. He is at the Institute for Counter-Terrorism, the IDC Herzliya, head of the Prosecuting Terrorism Intelligence Unit at the ICT. And his work covers the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the phenomenon of Palestinian suicide terrorism. He also works on the internet as a tool for propaganda, recruitment, and fundraising for radical Islam. And Professor Jeffrey Herf is at the University of Maryland, where he works on modern European history, specializing in 20th century Germany. Yale University Press has recently published his book, Nazi Propaganda for the Arab World, which has gotten a great deal of attention, about the Third Reich's efforts to diffuse its ideology to North Africa and the Middle East during World War II. And he will be speaking on Nazi propaganda to the Arab world and its effect in post-war militant Islam. So we will begin with Professor Menahem Milson.
Well, nice meeting you again. Actually, my verbal presentation now, in a sense, completes my comments on the pictures, or maybe gives a larger introduction to what the pictures you saw. Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism is today the form of anti-Semitism that poses the most danger to Israel and to Jews everywhere in the world. It is uniquely insidious because it is often disguised as criticism of Israel. That is supposedly a legitimate intellectual and political engagement. At the very start of my talk, I should like to make some preliminary remarks. Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism is not a new phenomenon. However, when it comes to Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism, there are many who prefer to look the other way. Until just a few years ago, Israeli and Jewish academics and public figures have all but ignored it. There have been a few exceptions, of course, some in Israel, some elsewhere, but these have been few. The fear of being labeled anti-Arab and accused of being Islamophobic has been enough to keep the overwhelming majority of Middle Eastern academic experts away from the subject. The reluctance has not been only academic, it has also been quite typical of people in the media and in politics to ignore Arab anti-Semitism. I have already mentioned one reason for this. There is another political motivation behind the unwillingness to deal with Arab anti-Jewish attitudes. That's the fear that the exposure of anti-Semitic sentiment on the Arab side would reinforce political intransigence in Israel and play into the hands of political groups which oppose any territorial compromise. This is a concern. It is not to be poo-pooed. However, it must be recognized that shutting our eyes to Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism is not only intellectually dishonest, but also politically misguided. Countering Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism is an indispensable part of our struggle to achieve peace. The dehumanized image of the Jew forms an impediment to peace and normal relations. Second point. When speaking of anti-Semitism, I do not mean criticism of this or that Israeli policy. Mere criticism of Israel, whether justified or not, is not anti-Semitism. I'm speaking about dehumanization and demonization of the Jews and about the expectations of Muslims that they will slaughter all the Jews at the end of time. I mean, you have seen it, and so you know what I'm talking about. Third point. The issue of contemporary Arab anti-Semitism is quite distinct from that of Muslim attitude to Jews and Judaism prior to the modern era. While these two issues are interrelated in various ways, their historical contexts are so completely different that to treat them together is either a methodological mistake or worse, a deliberate attempt to obscure the issue. They should be treated separately. I'm referring here to arguments that are here from time to time, but what about the Golden Age in Spain? The 11th, 12th century. To use it, to bring it up today in a totally different context is simply either a stupid methodological mistake or, as more often, a deliberate attempt to obfuscate the issue. Fourth point. There are those who claim that if you engage in exposing Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism, you are guilty of Islamophobia. This is, of course, a false charge. To expose Arab anti-Semitism is not in any way to say that all Arabs or all Muslims are anti-Semitic. However, this false charge has a purpose. It is intended to stop, indeed to preempt, the struggle against Arab anti-Semitism and to provide immunity to anti-Semites. Such manipulations should be rejected with contempt. And the fifth point, it should be emphasized that Arab anti-Semitic propaganda does not distinguish clearly between Jew, Zionist, and Israeli. These three concepts, again, as you have seen, it is amply shown in the various clips, so that these three concepts, Jews, Israelis, Zionists, are used by the Arab and Iranian anti-Jewish publications as though they were synonymous. Now, what are the distinctive features of Arab anti-Semitism? And the following conclusions are based on really hundreds and hundreds of articles, be they written articles, be they television programs that we at Memory have monitored over the past 8 years. The distinctive features are based on one hand on indigenous elements and on borrowed imported elements. The first, the indigenous ones, the traditional Islamic sources, are, among others, the idea, the notion that Jews are apes and pigs, and you see how it is inculcated into young children. This insult, of course, is not really part of the Quran, because as I explained before, Quran does not say that all Jews are apes and pigs, but a given group of Jews who actually were not good Jews because they violated the Sabbath. But it has been taken already in the medieval times as a slur against all Jews, and is used now quite often by preachers. As a result of the exposure of this motif and protests of various Jewish organizations to embassies, especially in Canada and in Washington, to Egyptian embassies about that, the Al-Azhar Council, Scholarly Council, issued an advice, not a directive, but an advice to all preachers to abstain from using this slur. They can't order them not to use it, but they advise them, and that's itself interesting, but we haven't seen that this disappeared, not yet. The other motive is that the attempt to kill the Prophet. The Jews conspired to murder the Prophet Muhammad, and you saw it also both in the talk of the girl. Well, you didn't see this little girl. I cut the clip short, but this little girl who speaks about Jews and apes and pigs also knows to tell the moderator that a Jewish woman attempted to kill the Prophet Muhammad, and she repeats the story, which is a complicated story, but she was trained well, this 3.5-year child. Finally, the eschatological tradition, the promise of which is known in the Arab tradition as the promise of the stones and the trees. The stones and the trees undertake to tell about Jews who will be hiding behind them at the end of time when the Muslims have to kill them, with the exception of the Rifat, which many preachers believe is planted around all the Jewish settlements in Israel, and you who visit Israel can look for it. Because the Jews know about the tradition and they know that this will be a place to hide when the day comes. So he spoke about that, If you watch it on Google Earth, you can see it. You can actually see it. Well, try. Then comes the Western element. Bloodline. This has come to the Arab world, the Middle East, with the Damascus blood libel in 1840, when actually the Ottoman government, which is the Islamic government, tried to limit it and eventually released the Syrian Jews who were arrested. But before they were released, they were tortured, tormented, and so on. It was very to do. But since then, it has become very common. In the years of Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar's Assad father, his eternal vice president and minister of defense, Mustafa Tlas, who considered himself an intellectual, wrote a book which was given and which was published and was very popular about how the Jews use blood, and this book used to be given as a gift to every Syrian officer, and the book is still around, published and republished again, reprinted again and again. And of course it was made into a film. In the year 2003, the Syrians produced a movie, a television series called The Diaspora, Ash-Shatat, which presents the history of the Jews in the diaspora, but interpreted in accordance with the protocols of the Elders of Zion and with the idea that Jews use blood. One scene from it you saw, which was a bit dark, where the rabbi slaughters a Christian child. It is a terrible series, but was very popular at the time, and of course sold. It is being sold. The DVDs are sold all over. But the most insidious and very prevalent is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, the protocols were translated into Arabic first in 1925, after World War I. But for whatever reason, it didn't take root, it didn't spread. Not for a while, not for a whole generation. Interesting, it's a question in itself, and I dealt with it in an article which is coming out in Antisemitism International. But it started to become widespread in the mid-50s. A new translation came out in Egypt, and from then on it spread very much. I think the explanation for this is that when Jews were relatively weak, the whole idea that the Jews conspire or even think about controlling the world was not really attractive to Arabs and Muslims. However, after Israel became a state, after the Israeli Haganah and the other Jewish forces and the Israeli army managed to defeat the armies of 7 Arab countries, then you have a problem. You have a problem to explain, because Jews are known to be cowardly and humiliated. That's the Jew. Allah decreed that he be humiliated, Allah determined the Jews are cowardly. And all of a sudden, these cowardly Jews defeat the armies of 7 armies. This creates a cognitive dissonance, which requires an explanation. And what is better to explain it than a conspiracy theory? Conspiracy, that is something in which Jews are good, because even in the days of Muhammad, they conspired against him. Conspiracy, that's Jewish trait. How do they manage to defeat us? Through conspiracies. So the conspiracy theory is necessary. It helps soothe and solve the cognitive dissonance, and it really becomes very popular. So much so that in 2002 there is this series, the Egyptian series, from which you saw one picture, which was a very successful movie or series chosen to be shown in the nights of Ramadan. That is the peak time of viewing in the Muslim world. In the evenings after the fast, the family gathers, and there were some 40 chapters of this. So it was Ramadan plus 10 days after Ramadan. The series would not be outdone by the Egyptians, so the next year they produced Ashatat, but very cleverly and carefully they allowed Al-Manar TV to show it. That is Al-Manar in Lebanon, produced in Syria, shown from Lebanon by Hezbollah, the Syrian proxy. When we recorded it and translated the subtitles, this eventually was given by us to Natan Sharansky, at that time a member of the Israeli government, who saw to it that it comes to France. And Chirac personally, after watching it, ordered to outlaw Al-Manar TV, and to this day the Al-Manar channel is banned in France. The Jews murdered Jesus. Well, you had the explanation of Qaradawi. It doesn't matter that we Muslims know that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Nevertheless, the Jews were the criminals because they wanted him to die on the cross. So they are guilty. Unless they absolve themselves by denouncing this act. But they do not. So the fact, in a section which you didn't see, he keeps on saying, the fact that Pope, the Catholic Pope, absolved them from this doesn't mean that they're absolved, because there are other Christian groups. There are the Protestants, there are the Greek Orthodox, there are the Copts. So what the Vatican said on this thing doesn't mean that they are innocent or clear from the charge. Holocaust denial, there's a combination. There is Holocaust denial, or of course other forms of denial. They inflate the numbers. They both inflate the numbers. It couldn't have been 6 million because there weren't 6 million people in Europe, 6 million Jews in Europe, all sorts of funny and silly arguments. But also, and that's the frightening thing, well, never mind, there was a Holocaust, but they deserved it. They had to be punished. This was ordained by Allah. And next time, it will be at the hand of Jews, and it will be complete. The demonization of the Jew leads to all sorts of things, among others, of course, that the claim that many Muslims repeat on TV channels, radio programs, and articles, that it is Jews, the Mossad, sometimes with, sometimes without the cooperation of the CIA, that is behind the 9/11 destruction of the World Center. This is a very common theme in the propaganda, in the Islamist propaganda. And finally, what can be done about it? I think the first step is to understand that this is a dangerous form of anti-Semitism, a dangerous, very dangerous form of propaganda. Because when you create such an atmosphere in which Jews, individually and collectively, are not considered to be fully human, you prepare, you issue, in fact, a warrant for genocide. I'm using, of course, the phrase coined by Norman Cohn years ago. And all of this, the meaning of this propaganda is really a warrant for genocide. Because if they are so vile, so demonic, so cruel, then they surely should be destroyed. The Arab anti-Semitism has actually become the linchpin of the anti-Semitic international. There is now a very effective communist international, but there is an anti-Semitic international. Not a church which is organized, but still they know to identify each other. Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism, in a strange but dangerous way, has been embraced by the postmodern global theology, which falsely calls itself the human rights movement. This concocted, highly irrational global movement views the Jew, qua Israeli, as the demon and the Palestinian as the innocent victim. And theologies need demons on the one hand and innocent victims on the other. And that's in this unholy church, global church, postmodern church. Unfortunately, Israelis, Jews, Zionists are the demons. Countering Arab anti-Semitism is therefore not merely a matter of combating falsehood and prejudice. It is a vital component in the struggle of Jews in Israel and elsewhere for safety, peace, and human dignity. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Rifat Ali on conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism in Turkey.
Thank you. Greetings from Istanbul, Turkey. First of all, I would like to thank very much Professor Schwarzmol and Yale University for having invited me here. It's a great pleasure and challenge for me. I will be speaking about Turkish Jews and the antisemitism present in Turkey, something which is very much in the news since May 2010, after the Mavi Marmara incident. Turkey, which until the beginning of the millennium was often mentioned as the hearse of the Ottoman Empire, which for centuries had been a safe haven for the Jews, is today more frequently mentioned as a place where antisemitism and xenophobia are widespread. Indeed, a 2008 survey conducted by the Pew Research Center of Washington, D.C. on unfavorable views of Jews and Muslims in Europe showed that 76% of Turks surveyed had an unfavorable view of Jews and 74% of them an unfavorable view of Christians. A poll from 4 years earlier revealed much lower numbers, 52 and 49% respectively. In response to these results, the Turkish Jewish community conducted its own survey in September 2009 on the perception of different identities and Jews in the Turkish society. The research showed that 57% of the people questioned did not want an atheist family as a neighbor, 42% did not want a Turkish family of Jewish faith, 35% a Turkish family of Christian faith, 18% a family of foreign nationality, 13% a family belonging to another sect of Islam. In the face of such results, the first question to come to mind is how a society can change so radically in such a short period of time. The change is due primarily to two factors, one internal and one external. The internal factor is the landslide victory of the Justice and Development Party in the 2002 national election. The Justice and Development Party in Turkish is Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi. The acronym is AKP, but I will be using AK Parti, which has been the ongoing acronym in Turkey, because AK Parti literally means an immaculate party, insinuating that all the parties competing with AK Parti are in some way involved in corruption. The AK Party's ideological predecessor, the Virtue Party, was the last in a series of political parties began in 1969 by the anti-Semite Islamist leader Necmettin Erbakan, advocating for the latter's own national viewpoint milli görüş ideology. The Virtue Party was eventually banned by the Constitutional Court in 2001 on charge of having advocated and acted against the Republic's secularist principles. Unlike previous bannings and reformations, this time the national viewpoint movement split into two. On one side were the traditionalists who continued the movement with the Felicity Party, and on the other side the reformers who, under the leadership of future Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan and future Turkish President Abdullah Gül, established the AK Party. The reformers claimed that they did no more embrace the national viewpoint ideology, that their newly formed party was a Muslim conservative party similar to the Christian Democratic Union Party of the Federal Republic of Germany. AK Party would win the 2002 elections handily. This would be the beginning of a still ongoing social engineering project where the secularism imposed by Atatürk and scrupulously guarded by the Turkish armed forces would face its greatest challenge in history, and where Islamic and conservative values would start gradually replacing secular ones. AK Party's victory will give a self-confidence and aggressiveness to the Islamist press known for its anti-Semitic rhetoric, due to the party's implicit support of the press. Just to give you an example of this support, it is worth mentioning that reporters from the radical Islamist and anti-Semite newspaper Vakit are regularly invited to the press corps accompanying Prime Minister Erdogan and President Gül during their travels. The external factor is the invasion of Iraq in 2003. In the wake of the US-led effort, endless conspiracy theories will begin circulating within the Turkish media and among public intellectuals. The perennial villain in Turkish conspiracy theories, the Mossad and/or the Zionist State of Israel, both terms having an extremely negative connotation in the Turkish context, would again feature prominently. Among the more popular theories were those that claimed that the new autonomous government of the Kurdish region, established after the fall of Saddam Hussein, was receiving the support of Israel, that Mustafa Barzani, the father of Masoud Barzani, the current president of Kurdistan region of Iraq, was a Jew. Moreover, all of the talk to Israel-Kurdistan connections were meant to point in a direction that would suggest that the separatist Kurdish PKK movement was being supported by Israel. Another very popular conspiracy theory about crypto-Jews will circulate in the Turkish society, and with the support of books purporting to be works of investigative journalism or scholarly research and selling more than 100,000 copies. This theory claims that Sabbateans or crypto-Jews had long been and were currently dominating the Turkish Republic, and that as the most fervent advocate and guardians of militant secularists, they represented the major obstacle to the rule of Islam in the Turkish Republic. This conspiracy theory is one of the principal anti-Semitic themes inherent in the ideology of Turkish Islamists and its national viewpoint movement. According to this theory, the dethronement and exile to Salonika of Sultan Abdülhamid II by the Committee of Union and Progress actually represented the revenge taken by the late Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement as a whole for the Sultan's refusing his request to obtain permissions for Jews to settle in Palestine. Vengeance was wrought through the various Zionists and Sabbateans who the Islamists believe have dominated the Committee of Union and Progress. For the Islamists, the dethronement of Abdülhamid represents the end of the Ottoman Empire, an empire which still today they commemorate with much admiration. But Herzl's revenge did not stop there. It is seen to have continued with the Salonika-born founder of the Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, whom the Islamists believe to have been a Sabbatean, a crypto-Jew. Mustafa Kemal is hated by the Islamists for having abolished the Ottoman Sultanate and Caliphate and having imposed secularism on the Turkish society. The Islamists believe that if Islamic rule has yet to be re-established in Turkey, it is due to the studied obstructions of the Jews and their crypto-Jewish allies, the Sabbateans. In summary, the reasons for the growth of antisemitism in Turkey are: A. Anti-Semitic publications and conspiracy theories that have for decades been circulating widely and freely in the Turkish society and which gain strength with the internal and external factors that I mentioned. B, the denial by past and present governments of Turkey that antisemitism ever existed and their tolerant and forgiving attitude towards their manifestation. And finally, C, the journalists and writers who propagate these conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic rhetoric freely and who have been accepted as respectable researchers and or public intellectuals in the Turkish society. Now we come to Prime Minister Erdogan. From the day he was elected until today, Prime Minister Erdogan has been described by the American and Israeli political circles with the adjectives ex or former Islamist, Islamic rooted, moderate Islamist, or religiously conservative. Nowadays, a report of the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs described him rightfully as a prime minister who indirectly incites and encourages anti-Semitism in Turkey. The change in observers' perception of Erdogan is largely due to his harsh declarations after the Israeli Defense Force operation cast it in Gaza and the IDF interception on May 31st of this year of the Mavi Marmara ship carrying Turkish Islamist activists trying to break the Gaza blockade, and which resulted with the death of 8 Turkish and 1 Turkish American citizens. The shift is seen to have begun on January 28, 2009 at the Davos summit, where Erdogan, in an angry tone, said to Israel's President Shimon Peres, referring to Operation Cast It, "When it comes to murder, you people know very well how to kill." But this angry outburst was not merely a staged show for domestic politic consumption, as some analysts commented, but a genuine demonstration of his anger toward Israel. In fact, there were advanced signals of the forthcoming crisis. 12 days before the Davos incident, Erdogan would make the following statement, always in regards to Operation Cast It, and I am quoting: "There is a world media under the control of Israel. This has to be especially pointed out. As a matter of fact, if their publications were objective, then the incident will be seen in a very, very different light, but nobody raises their voice. Nobody says stop to this inhumanity. I am reading from the Torah. The 6th of the 10 commandments says, 'Thou shalt not kill.' In Hebrew, it's not risha. Under which law, which religion, with what conscience can they justify the killing of innocent children?" End of quote. After the tragic Marmara incident, Erdogan will repeat a number of anti-Semitic stereotypes in various declarations. For example, on June 4, while criticizing Israel, he again asserted that the Israeli government has put Israelis into a difficult position due to its irritating manner of conduct that hurt Israel's image in the world. He added that, quote, "I am sure that Israelis are disturbed by a perception equating the Star of Zion to the Nazi swastika." The next day, Erdogan reverted to the same subject, first stating that the international press is supported by Israel, the press got their instruction from Israel, and then criticized the Turkish press, which was critical of the Turkish government's latest overtures to Iran and its handling of the Mavi Marmara incident in following words, and I'm quoting: "Please put the Israeli newspapers in front of you and then put some of the well-known Turkish newspapers next to them. Believe me, there is no difference apart from language because these Turkish newspapers are subcontractors of Israel." In another, Erdogan referred again to the Jews in what was intended as a compliment, but was in fact yet another anti-Semitic stereotype. In his opening speech of October 2009 at a Turkish university, he said, I quote, "I believe that there are 3 important aspects of success: managing people, managing knowledge, managing money. If we are successful in all this, we will obtain well-being, we will create good scientists, we will manage our money well. The Jews, for example, have produced some very serious inventions. They are printing money from the place that they are sitting. You can see it in the history of the telephone and the light bulb. They are still deriving the benefits of them. When I was the mayor of Istanbul, I studied the Jewish citizens of Istanbul. Most of them do not own buildings but are tenants in the best places, because owning a building locks the money into one place, but if you are a tenant, you can earn money from your cash." In order to understand why Erdogan's statements concerning Israel and Jews are repetitions of anti-Semitic stereotypes, it is sufficient to remember that Erdogan's and his party's ideological roots are in the national viewpoint movement. The national viewpoint rhetoric, including that of its eminence grise Necmettin Erbakan, is full of anti-Semitic terms and conspiracy theories. Erdogan's statements repeating anti-Semite stereotypes shows that the negative stereotypes about Jews and Israel that he read or heard throughout his political career that started in the 70s in Erbakan's National Salvation Party and later in the Welfare Party, both parties followers of the national viewpoint ideology, are still present in his mindset in spite of his reassurances that both he himself and his party have abandoned this ideology. Nor should it be thought that the problem is solely limited to Erdogan. Rather, it is that AK Party's outlook on the world, similar to that of Turkish society as a whole, tends to be through the prism of conspiracy theories. Two examples of this will be sufficient to make my point. First example, during the same hours of the Mavi Marmara incident, PKK militants attacked military barracks in Iskenderun, killing 6 Turkish soldiers. Upon hearing of both incidents, Hüseyin Çelik, AK Party's vice president in charge of media and public relations, declares that we do not think that it is a coincidence that these two attacks happened at the same time. The subsequent increased number of PKK attacks against Turkish military targets days after led Erdogan to state that PKK was being manipulated by subcontractors, and the consensus in the Turkish society was that the subcontractor was Israel. Example 2. After the Mavi Marmara incident, Ömer Çelik, AK Party's vice president in charge of foreign relations, paid a visit to Washington. He contacted the administration and American Jewish organizations and then organized a press conference at the end. At the conference, he referred to the strained Turkish-Israeli relations and declares that Israel is making propaganda and trying to show the current tension as emanating from Turkey, from Prime Minister Erdogan. We know what this means. Those who know well the history of Turkey knows that such propaganda is simply some people's, meaning Israelis, inciting either a military coup or undemocratic means and ways in Turkey. End of quote. Prime Minister Erdogan has repeatedly warned the Islamist activists and protesters demonstrating against Israel to make distinctions between the people of Israel and the government of Israel, saying that he is critical of the Israeli government only and not of the Israeli people, as well as between the state of Israel and Turkish Jews, wishfully thinking that the public will make a difference between Turkish Jews and the demonized image of Zionism and the state of Israel. He has also, however, while appealing to the public to make this distinction and thus protecting Turkish citizens, he has also frequently incited anti-Jewish activists by simply repeating anti-Semitic stereotypes. For a number of historical reasons, Turkey's overwhelmingly Muslim society and its political establishment have long been suspicious of the country's non-Muslim citizens' loyalty. In addition, both Zionism and Israel have long been associated with unremittingly negative connotation within Turkish public space. In such a poisoned atmosphere, it is normal for the Turkish Jewish community and its leaders to mask their true feelings towards both Zionism and the State of Israel. Until the Mavi Marmara incident, Turkish Jewish leadership, if asked, will describe the community's relationship to the State of Israel as an emotional tie to Israel. After the Mavi Marmara incident, it is no more possible to describe this relationship in such terms, since if it is done so, it will be seen as the leadership's implicit endorsement of Israel's intervention on the Mavi Marmara. Such approval will be perceived by the Turkish society, which already suspects minority loyalties to Turkey, as synonymous with a betrayal of the fatherland. Under these conditions, the current and future security of Turkish Jewish community is dependent on how successful the leaders of Turkish Jewry are in transmitting to the Turkish public an image of a community which is non-Zionist, and extremely critical of the state of Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Next, Fighel on the Jihad Flotilla.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Charles, for inviting me. After the war of ideas, now we come to action. It's not only ideas. And I was stunned. I remember my first experience with anti-Semitism while I was a young military governor in the West Bank in Tulkarem, Menahem, in 87, beginning of the first Intifada. And I was touring the refugee camp of Tulkarem and trying to give a small kid a sweet. And the mother came and said, don't take it, it's poison. So the young child said, why? And she told him, the mother, he is a Jew. Now, for me as an Israeli, as a Sabra, born in Israel, retired as a colonel, for me anti-Semitism is very remote. It's a Gola issue. Frankly. Now, no more. Of course, there is a bonding between the diaspora and Israel. Of course, it's very important. But me, as Yoni, born in Israel after the third generation after the Holocaust, it is stories from Zayda. It's not something which is now and here. And unfortunately, it's now and here. Not only because of the Mavi Marmara events, even before, and this is what Professor Milson started to describe, the radical Islamic antisemitism, which materialized on the Mavi Marmara. Now, to put it in a context, I think that the Gaza Flotilla has to be seen in a broader context. And the broader context is, first of all, that Hamas strives to achieve international recognition in Europe, in other parts of the world, and to get legitimacy. This is on one hand. Parallel to that, to maintain the ceasefire as much as it is serving its struggle, and shift the struggle from the Gaza Strip into the international arena, using and recruiting the anti-Semitic elements. The agenda of releasing the prisoner is high priority, and of course lifting the siege over Gaza. Generally, to build a negative branding of Israel, human rights abuser, pariah state, illegitimacy of its existence. For this purpose, the radical Islamic ideas, sentiments are being recruited. Now, what Professor Milson has shown you, it's not just a group of weirdos speaking about, sometimes I heard some laughters, because they really look a little bit not connected to reality. But these are the elements which are penetrating and then being translated into action items, as we'll see in the case of the Mavi Marmara. Hamas for long, radical Islamic general Hamas in the Israeli-Palestinian arena was very much building, especially after the cast-lead operation in 2008, an international network of delegitimization to recruit anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli, all the elements involved in a so-called philosophical ethical arguments, not only human rights, but additional arguments. This network furnishes Israel's reputation, very much wishing to diminish and constrain the military Israeli capabilities, because they're not being perceived as war crimes or illegitimate, to shift and build and renew a symmetrical advantage to Hamas. When I speak Hamas is also Islamic Jihad, but basically is Hamas. This campaign is involved in all spheres of propaganda, international court of aid, academic boycott, you name it, media, parliaments, and so on and so forth, especially in the West. Since Castle, Hamas has very much increased its anti-Semitic propaganda. It triggered many expressions of anti-Semitism in the Arab world, but also within Hamas and the Palestinians. Anti-Semitic motives taking from Islamic motives and also from the traditional European foundations or history. The element of the Jews, as they are descendants of the apes and the pigs, was all the time on the agenda. The aspiration of the Jews to take over the world. Comparison between the Gaza war, all the time the comparison between the Gaza